took my first dose of Ritalin at 27 in the Long's Drugs parking lot, for those who remember that particular chain, which is now CVS. I took it and I just wanted to see what would happen. And it was unbelievable. It was almost like the Wizard of Oz, where it goes black and white to color. I suddenly realized this is how other people feel and think. And so for 5 years, I put myself through my own kind of executive functioning coaching of my own design. But I knew for sure that if I was going to make it vocationally and as a husband and a father someday, that the way I was comporting myself, these things could not be on the table or present when I was later in life. So people would not know today that I suffered those afflictions because I've worked through them. I will always be a work in progress. Unless they read my book. But boy, I'm so grateful to the field that I'm in for providing me with those benefits.
Constantly achieving, but still finding yourself feeling empty? Join the club, because it's growing. Dr. Adam Dorsay, the author of SuperPsyched, has a roadmap for that. In his book, he breaks down the roots of this underlying discontent that so many clients in his therapy practice present, along with ways to fight it. Dorsay is a psychologist and an executive coach, as well as the host of the award-winning podcast, SuperPsyched. On today's podcast, we are talking about what Adam has learned about the roots and the remedies of our collective discontent. It's more than just connection to hear him explain it, and he came by this knowledge honestly, not just through his own therapy practice, but through his journey to find his own diagnosis in his 20s and pave the path to feeling ready to pursue his true calling. And just as connecting with himself helped him to find his version of a life that is super psyched, he makes a pretty strong case for why the same is also possible for me and for you. Your book is called Super Psyched, and I would shorthand the crux of your book as this. If your cup is empty, despite all that you have obtained or have achieved, then you are failing to find your version of living super psyched, which was kind of the goal of all those achievements along the way anyway. And your thesis, it seems, is that the opposite of being super psyched and the root of this disappointment is being super disconnected. So did I get it right?
I would say so.
So taking a step back, tell me about your anxiety, depression, dyslexia, ADHD. When did you become aware of all of it?
Mm-hmm. Great question. For sure, they were circulating through me at various times in my life. It took me until my 20s to recognize that these were happening. The taxonomy was not really present in my youth. I tested very well in classes in terms of my IQ, but my performance, there was a massive disparity, and that's very common amongst people with learning disabilities. The performance is not commensurate with the IQ, for what it's worth. And a lot of people, of course, are poking holes in IQ, and rightfully so. But I started out in this kind of the gifted and intelligent classes and worked my way down all the way to the, what was considered the bottom at the time, which was special education. It took me many years to realize that I did not have some type of developmental disorder that we called, back then in the 80s, it was called mentally retarded. You can't use that term now.
Yeah.
But my father disabused me of this at a very young age and said, no, you're actually smart. There's something else at play. But sadly, I had marinated in that identity for so many years. So I'm still doing my best to separate the wheat from the chaff on that notion that I was not intelligent. But in my 20s, I did my own therapy and realized that the things I was feeling were actually clinically relevant. The sadness, the depression, the anxiety, and certainly at 27 being diagnosed finally with ADHD of the inattentive type, very different from the hyperactive, the one who swings from the chandelier in the classroom. I was the one who was looking out the window.
Yeah, just distracted, right? Like back then they would have said distracted and doesn't pay attention and all sorts of other words we don't use anymore.
And they also would say that it was a character issue, like just, come on, get it together. And then when I finally got that diagnosis, it was utterly emancipating.
Of all these different parts of what you didn't know at the time was your diagnosis, ADHD, depression, dyslexia, anxiety, was there one that put you over the edge?
Yes.
Was there a trigger? Was it that the depression gets so bad, that the anxiety gets so bad? Was it a relationship that changed, a job situation? What sparks trying Ritalin for the first time?
Yeah. So what sparked it was I had a hypothesis. I was working in the corporate world at the time. I could see my peers and how they would attack certain things or attend to certain things. And I could see a disparity between me and my peers. I fortunately also had a really, really good professional mentor. His name was Martin Dorner. He is of blessed memory now. But he took great interest in me because he saw the potential. And his belief in me, this incredibly competent, smart man who said, you've got something and I want to help you get it because I see it. He saw a spark. And there was something so moving about having this brilliant man see something in me that was incredibly validating. So I was going to do anything I could. In my own therapy, the person I was seeing said, I have a pretty strong sense that ADHD is in the mix. Go get tested. And if it comes out positive, which it did, go seek medical help. And interestingly, I would say that was the moving piece that really changed things. By getting that under control, my anxiety was reduced because I began to develop confidence. And my depression also began to, I was going to say the word shrink, but yes, because it sounds almost too like a pun, but for sure dissipated. But it did shrink. And there's no confidence greater than having a historical basis for the confidence. Somebody can tell you you've got this, but if you know because of actual historical data that you've got this, then you've got this. And I began to
capacity to got this, right?
That I had the capacity to got this. And so I was really so grateful. I hold the mentors in my life very dear to my heart. And I am highly coachable, and because the desire and the motivation was there.
Sometimes a mentor doesn't know they're a mentor. I remember being in like 3rd grade and we had to write an essay to go in the little school literary book at the end of the year, and I was procrastinating. And then I woke up in the middle of the night and I wrote a poem and I went back to sleep. Maybe 4th grade, I want to say. 3rd or 4th grade. Wrote this down, went back to sleep, submitted it, and Mr. Ketchum put it into the book. And about a week later, it's right before winter break. He's reading the finished book at his desk while all the kids are putting their backpacks, coats, and running out to the school buses. As I'm running out, he looks up from his desk and he says, Poonam, I just read what you wrote. I was like, okay, Mr. Ketchum, can I go? And he says, you're really mad. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not, Mr. Ketchum. I got to go. I got to get the bus. So I went and I got the bus, and then I reread it. And it was the first time that I ever thought, wow, my words could impact an adult like that, could make them stop. And, fast forward, I've written 4 books. People don't know the impact of their words. And I wasn't angry. The poem was about whether this was reality because I had a dream that seemed very vivid. When I woke up, that world was gone. And I just was gripped by this idea that what if this is not reality? And someone's about to wake up, and what's going to happen to us?
Very much so.
But yeah, it sort of sticks with you. So tell me about what triggers the jump from corporate life to being a therapist and the populations you work with, because it's pretty diverse.
True. I had initially, in my 20s, wished to become a therapist, but untreated with the ADHD and the dyslexia, the demands academically were too much. I decided to enter the workforce. I came to realize this was far easier than trying to sit in a cave writing a dissertation by myself and reading everything I needed to read at that time.
Okay.
So I found that I kind of liked the corporate world. And, that old Zen saying, I believe it has Zen roots, when the student is ready, the teacher arrives or appears. And that is exactly what happened. I was initially working for a company called Kumon, the math and reading company, and I was what they called a regional manager taking care of after-school learning centers in Northern California for a particular area within.
Yeah, Kumon strikes fear in my son's heart even after years. Hated it. I was glad he went, but he was not a happy boy.
Oh, I have a lot of respect for Kumon. I think that they really, the repetition is the mother of mastery, and Kumon really understood that, and I was very pleased with it. Anyway, it was a good training ground for me, but I realized when I married my wife, who was a psychologist, and every night I would hear her talking about her day, and I was thinking to myself, at that point I was in sales, and I thought, gosh, that was supposed to be my day.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And
yeah.
it was
It's
so painful.
Right? She's doing satisfying work.
But, I just want to really be clear, never was anyone's identity. We don't do that. But she was telling me about her day, the quality of her day, the joy and satisfaction she experienced from helping certain people with certain things. And I was thinking that was supposed to be my day. But I felt this cognitive dissonance, and I couldn't quite reconcile the idea that I wanted to do this at this stage in life, because in your 30s, with a house and a child already on board, it's not exactly the best time to say, you know what I'm going to do is go get a doctorate.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what I did, because I had her support in doing that. And so I went to school at nights and weekends. And at one point I tendered my resignation because it came time for me to earn my hours and also earn $10 an hour with no benefits.
Lovely. Yeah.
It just everybody's dream comes true at that stage in life. So of course we had to take out a home equity line of credit. But she was totally 100% on board. Not once was she anything less than supportive for my mission, and it was worth it.
Well, I will say, look, a fulfilled partner is a hell of a lot more joy in the household than a cranky, unfulfilled partner.
100%.
So there's a part of that. So tell me quickly, though, what populations do you focus on, or did you focus on when you started? Did you have an idea about what you wanted?
Yes. Great question. I did not know what my population was. When I was doing my postdoc, I was working with gang-affiliated adolescents who were on probation. But in the private practice setting, I was working with primarily women. As soon as I became licensed, though, it was not women who were knocking at my door. It was men. And my specialty presented itself based on who was knocking at my door. I knew I would know when I knew. And lo and behold, I did. And I found myself loving working with men who were going through what they were going through. They'd done all the right things. They'd gone to the right schools. They got the right jobs. They got married. They had the big houses, but they were basically living on someone else's script.
Discontent. Just
profound discontentment and disconnection. Sure.
These are high-performing men, and they're deeply discontent. It's interesting because you're talking about how you could have stayed in corporate, but you were sort of a case study in that disconnection, right? That discontent, even if you weren't unhappy with your larger life, because obviously you've got a good partnership and your kind of life has the momentum that maybe you wanted to have at the time with the baby and the wife and the house and the life and all that kind of stuff. But in your book, SuperPsyched, you say that connection is essentially the only thing that fills our cup, right?
Sure. So I want to be really clear. As a scientist, I can't say that connection is the only thing that fills our cup, but I would say it is probably correlated or at least embedded in what fills our cup. But the 4 types of connection, they're all important. The big driver, of course, is the nucleus, how we connect with ourselves. It kind of ripples outward. But the one connection that informs all connection is how well we know ourself and what we are about, what we're into.
Do you think that's the one people lack the most in your experience?
It would be hard for me to make that assumption, but I would say my knee jerk is yes. That if we are not connected with ourselves, it will inform how we connect with others. Let's say I'm not very well connected with myself. I will be limited in the scope of what I'm able to discuss, because I will stick with the safe stuff. I'll stick with tech, sports, politics, but I won't talk about like the real personal stuff because I haven't really spelunged into my internal drivers to find out like who am I, and I would not be at all comfortable saying, yeah, I'm really struggling with this idea in my life. And that is one of the starting places for connecting with ourselves. It was what compelled me to do the TEDx talk on men and emotions. And without being conversant in that language, being able to describe our emotions, we miss out on a lot of really rich data for ourselves on the important decisions in our lives.
No.
It's interestingly, neurophysiologically, and I believe it was Antonio Damasio out of MIT, talked about the phenomenon where we've seen what happens when people don't have their emotional centers in their brain online, and they're not able to make decisions at all. Without the ability to actually tap into their emotions, they can't decide because emotions are a factor in our decisions. And one of the most important decisions you and I both probably would agree on is, who do you marry?
Yeah.
And what I hear very often in my office is, man, I knew I shouldn't have pulled the trigger, but I was basically told, and excuse the expression because I'm going to swear, to shit or get off the pot. And so I went for it, but there was an internal nagging. I couldn't really articulate that it wasn't right. And now I'm in this custody battle with my ex-wife. So that's not an uncommon thing that I see. And had they been more conversant in emotions, they might not have pulled the trigger on that decision, and they might have gone elsewhere.
So tell me the 4 types of connection, because I have a follow-up question.
So imagine 4 circles, concentric, starting with self in the nucleus, and then others, how we connect to others. Others could include, of course, our significant others, our children, our clients, our friends. Could be me talking with you right now. You are an other. The third way we connect is how we connect to the world. That includes how we connect with work, our nature, our ancestry, and then how we connect with something greater. For some, that means religion, but even for the most orthodox atheist, something rather spiritual in nature.
Before I read your overview on the types of connection, I would have assumed that you would say the type of connection people lack most is something like community, because there's this loneliness epidemic. But it seems like more what you're getting at is, in your experience, the type of connection people miss most or lack most is a connection to themselves. And if that is true, then it makes sense that people are lonely, because even if they're out doing quote unquote social things, they don't know how to connect. I don't have surface conversations with anyone. I would have this kind of conversation with someone in an elevator, right? Like I don't really know how to do that.
You don't do small talk.
I do small talk, but for about a minute. If I'm going to spend more than a minute with you, I'm going to make you interesting to me, because this is my time, right? This is my day.
Between your birth date and your death date very seriously.
I take everything seriously. I take it so seriously.
That's awesome.
But I would have thought you would have said community, but basically you're creating sort of a virtuous circle, and none of it works unless it's together.
Well, it's interesting because for some people, the way they get to know themselves, and I would agree with Harville Hendricks, who says that all learning takes place in the context of relationship. The only problem that we have is our brains tend to conform. I mean, that's been for the survival of the tribe. We needed to conform. It was good for, to have a united front. But the problem is what happens when we conform and we don't honor who we are, we experience a cognitive dissonance.
Decided. So, you talked a little bit about shadow self. You talk about the parts of us that we don't admit to and how that relates to connecting and the inability to connect.
Like high school is the petri dish of learning to hide yourself, right?
100%.
And I have interviewed people who are social psychologists, evolutionary psychologists, things like that. The theme that comes through in all those conversations when they're more academic is that we actually evolved to lie, and we need to know that about ourselves because we lie to other people so that we don't get ostracized, because ostracization meant death if you were out of the tribe. And we evolved for that. We haven't lived in high rises and gone to Starbucks for a large percentage of human history, right? For a large percentage of human history, we were out there, and if someone kicked us out, the mastodon stomped us.
100% correct.
All of the reasons for our fears are founded, and I think starting from that place helps make it clear why everybody is hiding parts of themselves, and the work of the life is to uncover it and figure out how to make it better. And it leads to so much loneliness. And we have some statistics on that. We know that a third of people over 45 feel quote unquote lonely. We know that a quarter of people over 65 are technically socially isolated. And there's reasons for that. We also know that the younger generation, and my kids included, is just isolated in many ways that those of us over 40 can't really fathom in terms of the impact of it, because these are their formative years. So, we had the benefit of a more interactive world. We know what we're missing. When the pandemic happened, people like you and I understood what we were missing. Just the other day, because it's the holidays, I had my kids watch A Christmas Story. And specifically because this act of a bunch of boys walking to school together every day in old school Cleveland, which my kids won't experience because we're in New York City, but they wouldn't experience anyway, even in a small town, because people don't do that anymore. This act of small boys walking to school together, someone falls down, you might curse at him, but you're going to help him back up. The bullies come, they hit you, they steal your lunch, and then one day you find the fight in you and you never stop swinging and that kind of thing. These are all really formative turning point moments that kids are not having. And I think the reason it's important is because we're losing that those shared moments of becoming are being lost. Because how do you become a fighter, right? It's the story you tell yourself because you're looking for proof. You're saying you needed proof that you were smart, right? That you could go get the thing done. These are the moments where, like, Ralphie got proof that he was a fighter, that he doesn't take it lying down. And my son's watching it. He goes, Mom, look, he won't stop swinging. And I'm like, exactly. Watch it again. Rewind. Watch it again. Because this is what I want. Just swing kind of thing. But
so you're hoping to have a vicarious learning through the movie. Yeah.
I don't want him to get into a fight, but if he does, I want him to, swing harder. And I have theories on what all of this is going to do to the landscape of just kind of American social life. But first, I want to go back to the topic that you mentioned, which is alexithymia. What is alexithymia? And rephrase, is it more chemical or more situational in your experience?
In my experience, it's more situational. I think that people do have the ability to name their emotions when they're taught, just as Americans who tend to be monolingual on average have the capacity to learn. It requires those four stages of learning a thing. The four stages are, we start with unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. Mm-hmm. Imagine you're learning how to drive a stick shift. The next stage is conscious incompetence. Oh my gosh, I'm sitting in the driver's seat. There's a stick shift here. There's a steering wheel. There's this clutch thing, and there's a brake and a gas, and everything else. And then when you do it enough, you become consciously competent. You're able to do it, but it takes all of your RAM space in your brain. Like, to do this thing, to do the target behavior, requires 100% attention. You can't take your eyes off it. And then once you get enough reps, you become unconsciously competent. You're able to drive that stick shift without thinking. And so similarly with learning anything are those four stages. And it requires something that many self-identified smart people are not willing to do, and that is to look stupid for a while. We've got to look stupid for a period of time. As Guy Kawasaki says, you've got to make ass, which is a Hawaiian expression of you got to make an ass out of yourself. Learning anything, with the proper motivation and the proper mindset, almost anybody can learn anything But yeah, I do believe that we impose these self-limitations. So connecting with ourselves and realizing, speaking to ourselves more kindly, there's tons of research indicating that self-compassion, having a compassion, an internalized Ted Lasso in our brains, actually helps us perform better, much better than having a mean coach.
Mean coach never worked. Well, never worked for me anyway. Because
it works for 4 years. We've seen it work at the university level for 4 years, but I have not seen it work in the NBA. The great coaches, like Phil Jackson or Steve Kerr or Popovich, they have a gentle fierceness and kindness, and kindness will win the day.
Well, let's hope, because I'm coaching my kids. And the other day I said to my son, unfortunately for you, what I've decided I'm going to give you and your sister in 2025 is the gift of figuring out you can be excellent at something. It's going to be a lot of Mama's getting the tutors, Mama's getting everything. And then if you want to give something up in a year, fine, but you better stretch, because party's over.
And one of the things I love about what you're doing with your kids is that they intrinsically love the thing, whether it's chess or squash.
Oh yeah.
You're not saying you're not imposing, something that they don't like and saying for our appearances. No, you're saying you're leading the way, you're into this intrinsically. Yeah. And even if you don't like it a year later, we're going to take advantage of this window of time and see if we can stretch your abilities. Yeah. But what you're going with, what do you love? Right. And I love Adam Grant's book, Think Again, in which he talks about, like, what are your verbs? Like, what are the verbs that get you alive? And that's a real good predictor of what you're going to want to do professionally, because many of the professions in our children's careers are not yet born. We did not know what an AI wrangler was, let alone a web designer was in the 80s. And during our children's lifetimes, it should be the verbs that drives them, not this fixed idea of what do you want to be. The thing you're doing, from my vantage point, is you're teaching them a recipe for excellence that they can apply to anything, because it's not just about squash, it's not just about chess. Yeah. It's those skills are going to be related to any pursuit that they have in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And confidence is all that this is about. You quoted Professor Dan Gilbert as saying that humans are the only animals that can imagine a future.
I love that quote so much.
What do you estimate that means for our mental health? Is it a curse?
It's a blessing and a curse, but we need to own it rather than have it own us. Let's start with the bad news. The bad news is the fact that we can imagine a future also causes us to catastrophize, to create horror shows in our minds about what the future is going to look like. And then we experience profound anxiety, and then we're not connected to the moment. If I'm thinking about something going sideways, and I'm making it into a Freddy Krueger movie in my mind, which we often do, it's called a cognitive distortion. It's called catastrophizing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an artifact of the negativity bias which kept us alive, because we know that what might kill us will cause our bloodline to cease to exist. And to your point earlier, you said, our brains have been the same for millennia, and estimations of 35,000 to 100,000 years is how old our brains are, this current model between my ears and yours. And I'm looking at an iPhone on my desk. I mean, this one has been out for just a few months. Our brains have been associated with a reality that's tens of thousands of years old, and yet our current situation have changed dramatically. So these old brains are not well suited for the rapidity of change that's going on in our lifetimes. The advent of smartphones, the advent of LLMs. I mean, it's nuts.
You're making a mental connection for me, where you're talking about the iPhone, and I'm thinking, if the app that is our brain has not been updated in 35,000 years, then no wonder it's glitching all day, every day.
So back to the Dan Gilbert quote. So the good news is we can, leverage that for executive functioning to imagine, like, how do I prepare for this important thing that I'm about to do?
Yeah.
And that part of the prefrontal cortex, which handles our ability for planning and imagining a future and what do I need to do to get that future, is a very good component of our brains. And it's the question is, are we using it or is it using us? So the bottom line is we can afford to have a false positive. In other words, we can afford to think something bad is going to happen and it not happen, but we cannot afford in our minds to not be prepared for a true or for a false negative. Like if we think something's okay and it's not. So when we hear the rustle in the leaves, we assume, oh my gosh, it must be a tiger, when in fact, it's a squirrel. And nobody dies if that happens, but we would die if we think it's a squirrel and we think it's just fine, and we approach the bush and out jumps a tiger and kills our bloodline. And the question is, how do you be prepared enough without absolutely screwing your life? How do you go through life without having to wear a Kevlar layer and then like a steel layer over it? I mean, then you're not going to feel life
or connect with anyone.
So it's a very difficult equilibrium to establish. Like, how can I? It includes vulnerability. Like, how vulnerable can I be with a person? Well, the fact of the matter is, with some people you can. With some people there is that psychological safety that it feels so indebted to Amy Edmondson out of Harvard Business School, who actually identified that psychological safety is highly correlated with innovative companies, and the companies who lack it tend to fall behind. Psychological safety requires that sense that I can say something and fall on my face in front of you and look like a complete ass for a moment, and then you will not, and then we will build on that, and something, that there is that degree of safety.
It is interesting you draw the connection between the fear of failure in business and the fear of failure in relationships, because truly the thing that so many people are lacking is that feeling of connection. And the first way they think about it in terms of this kind of large conversation about this wave of loneliness that's hit all of us collectively, the first way that people talk about it is in terms of connecting to other people. And then they're contending with not really knowing themselves well enough to be able to even really reveal in a way that does that bid and connect, reveal and connect down.
I love the way you say it. It is a bid.
But it's also, it kind of stunts them to begin with, because even if they know themselves relatively better than they did 10 years ago, they're afraid of failure in the form of rejection. There was someone else I interviewed on the podcast a couple months ago, Carlos Andres Gomez, and he was talking about a statistic that the time in men's lives where they feel the same level of closeness with their friends that girls do is around age 7 or so. Then they start to lose it because they start to pick up on the societal cues about not being weak, not being vulnerable, not sharing, not crying, all of those things. And he said to me, when do you think they get that closeness back? The way that women are always close their whole lives, right? They lose it around age 8, the level of closeness with their best friend. At what age do you think they get it back? Never.
I thought so.
Never for the rest of their lives do men feel close again. And I thought, I don't know how you people get through the day.
So I'm totally on board with Carlos Andres Gomez. He got it right. The research has shown that boys are actually born more emotionally open than their female counterparts, but they lose it over time. I didn't realize it was exactly at 7 to 8. But in the end of Stand By Me, which is a great movie, the final line is, and I never had friends like I had when I was that age. And one of the things that I really aim to do with men who come to see me is build their friendship circle, build their willingness to talk about things that they can talk about that might be left on the table otherwise. So you can't just go right in and say, okay, I'm going to give you a whopper, a 9 out of 10. You build and see if you can. Some guys will say TMI. They'll shame their friend when they share something that's really, really personal. Or they'll give an eye roll and say some other judgmental thing, demonstrating to their friend
that I can't receive this.
That I cannot receive this. And one of the things that needs to be done is, first of all, I would love to get the word TMI out of the out of our
Yeah.
vernacular. I think it's a
Yes.
very shaming expression. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are times when somebody does overshare, and it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that either. But I
Sure.
would like to see people be able to have a pipeline through which really difficult conversations can transpire about like what is really going on in my life, rather than me dying with a secret. I mean, how many people go through this life dying, not feeling known by
Right.
anyone? And
It
that,
was that show, A Million Little Things, right?
are you kidding me? Are you
That
talking
was the
about that
one.
right now? I just finished
That was the
it.
one. Yeah, that was the one. It was.
I can't believe it. No one has brought that up.
Really?
No one has brought that up. It is a great show.
Well, I
That
thought it was
show.
great that they did it. I thought it was very timely. I don't think enough men have watched it to understand. I think they also took the storyline a little bit far with he's sleeping with his wife and all that kind of stuff. But the premise of it,
Whoa.
I was there for, right? The premise of it,
Could not agree more. Yeah.
that people spend, men in particular in society, and it's not their fault, have been socialized to think that just spending time together is enough.
That's
and I
right.
wondered if your recommendation to the men who you counsel, who are lonely, I wondered if you would say to them, if nothing else, no more text-only relationships.
Hmm.
You know, what would be that one piece of
Yeah.
advice?
So there's no universal law, but I will say that there is, a hierarchy of communication.
Yeah.
The lowest form is text or Slack
Yeah.
or whatever you want to call it. One up is email, a little better.
Yeah.
A voice text is better still. You don't need to have a reason to call your friend.
Yeah.
Very often, men in particular think there has to be an agenda. There has to be an item. No, I'm just calling because you're awesome and
Yeah.
we're even more awesome together.
Yeah.
So a call is great. And then comes, of course, video. And
Yeah.
I would contend that there are a lot of people who live in geographically undesirable places from their homies, who they're dear friends, with whom they've kind of ceased contact. And it may be even a little bit embarrassing to try to broach the subject of, hey, let's reconnect. But of course, the top level in the hierarchy is in person. There's nothing quite like it. But
And I think childhood friends don't grow on trees, and you got to remind people of that.
Boom, yes.
Because people don't think about it that way. I guilt all my friends. We're doing a girls' trip. I don't care if we plan this 2 years out. You are coming.
You're the provocateur. You're the one who's willing to say this is happening. You're the Bradley Cooper character in the movie who says, you know what, guys, this is what's up. This is how we do it.
That's absolutely me. It's funny you mention him. That comes up in conversation a lot but I will say that we know the romantic relationship is not enough to sustain a life.
You got it.
We need our friends. We need all of it, and this is
You better believe it. Yeah. So we need
each other. Why don't we end with a lightning round?
Okay, hit me.
3 questions.
Yep.
Number 1, what can't you live without? To feel connected?
Love that question. There's so many things I can't live without. I can't
feel connected.
Yeah, I mean, my aforementioned wife. I mean, she's my top, attachment and connection. But I absolutely love having incredible podcasts to listen to, books to listen to, my friends, my pets, great food. I'm a foodie. Like you, I'm a cinephile. And I've also learned that as an extrovert, I need sometimes to just kind of go into a little bit of my own self-induced conclave where I'm just in a quiet place by myself.
Second question, on balance, were your ADHD, anxiety, depression, dyslexia on balance an albatross or a gift?
Great question. Both. And they were a gift because they were named and tamed. I have so much more empathy now for people who are in that space. They say that, you have to be one to heal one.
Final question. And I am neither, being or healing anyone, right? I'm not a therapist. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell 10-year-old Adam?
I love that question. Fail often. Be willing to try things. Be willing to look like an idiot. Be willing to be rejected. I'm going to hold your hand as you do it. You will not be alone.
Yeah.
And
I-
you will be so happy on the other side
Yeah.
of these mistakes, failures, chances you take, because we know that people on their deathbed don't regret their failures. They regret chances not taken.
Constantly achieving but still finding yourself feeling empty? Join the club because it's growing. Dr. Adam Dorsay, the author of SuperPsyched, has a roadmap for that. In his book, he breaks down the roots of this underlying discontent that so many clients in his therapy practice present, along with ways to fight it. Dorsey is a psychologist and an executive coach, as well as the host of the award winning podcast, Super Psyched. On today's podcast, we are talking about what Adam has learned about the roots and the remedies of our collective discontent. It's more than just connection to hear him explain it, and he came by this knowledge honestly, not just through his own therapy practice, but through his journey to find his own diagnosis in his 20s and pave the path to feeling ready to pursue his true calling. And just as connecting with himself helped him to find his version of a life that is super psyched, he makes a pretty strong case for why the same is also possible for me and for you.